All righty. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining our coffee and conversation. My name is T. McClinty, and I am the Outreach and Inclusion Officer here in our district. And today is September 14th, and we are going to have a great conversation today because we are going to be talking about the convention, the DFL convention. I know that there's been a lot that's been happening since the convention, but we have two delegates who agreed to be our guests today to talk about their experience attending the DFL convention. And as always, as Ron has always said, if you guys have questions, please feel free to raise your hand. But I think I want to get us started by asking Lynn first to introduce yourself and tell us why you why you wanted to be a delegate. And Cindy, this question will be the same for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, T. Excuse me. First I want to say thank you to everyone who attended the CD2 convention and voted for me. Based on others who were running, I was a little worried that I was not going to win. So I seriously was pleased and excited to have won your vote. How and why? When attending CD2 meetings, Dawn Erbestrasser, the Outreach and Communications or Outreach and Inclusion Officer, she held some informational sessions. And I thought, well, I'm at least going to go and see what it's all about and how you do it. Because I had really thought about volunteering at the convention, never thinking I would be a delegate. And in that, there were two females who attended. She said we needed to have 3 non-male delegates from CD2, and she only knew of one for certain that was running at CD2 convention. So I thought, oh, maybe this is an opportunity. So I ran, and that's, kind of how I thought why I went and how I got in.
Okay, thank you. Cindy?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you all for having me today.
And just turn up a little tad bit, Cindy. We can hardly hear you.
Oh, okay, sorry. Are you able to hear better now?
Yes.
Okay,
thank you.
Guys. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cindy Devenish. I am a new resident of Eagan for about 2 years. I moved from Minneapolis after living there for about 7 years. And when I moved to Eagan, I wanted to become involved and encourage others of various representations and backgrounds to be involved in legislation and politics in general. I became involved with the DFL Feminist Caucus, and I went to my first caucus here in Eagan. I ran for delegate. Unfortunately, I lost in CD2. However, I drove to Eagan and I became slated for the Biden-Harris campaign. And that was such an honor, and it remains an honor and a privilege. And so I'm just excited to continue to serve in various capacities within the DFL. I also serve in the SCC in the finance and budget, party affairs. Also, I'm the precinct chair for precinct 12. I'm also involved in small organizations that are growing, such as Black Political Action, Youth Civic Leaders. And I just say that to say it's an opportunity to encourage our marginalized communities to go out and vote, no matter your political viewpoint.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. And thank you, Lynn. I actually was, Lynn and I was having conversations about me possibly being a delegate. And, there was a lot of moving pieces happening at that time. And boy, was I kicking myself for not being a delegate after all those moving pieces was happening. And so then I wound up, taking a trip, and I came back and I finally sat down and I watched the convention, the convention just in full. And I tell you, I was so inspired, empowered to just like get into action. So Lynn and Cindy what were the key sticking points for you at the DFL convention, and what can one expect when they go to a national convention? Cindy, maybe you can start this time.
Sure. First, I just want to say the Democratic National Convention was simply an amazing event, a series of events. I flew into Chicago and left on a Sunday. Each day was packed with opportunities to engage with people worldwide. I mean, we had uh, people flying from Norway, from just all over the world. So it was truly amazing. And as a person who is both Norwegian and Bayesian West Indian descent, I found the historical value of Kamala Harris, being of Asian and Jamaican descent, just truly emotional. After the path that our late great Shirley Chisholm, who I'm sure all of you know is the first Black woman to be elected in the U.S. Congress, and she ran for president as well. Um, and I see a lot of similarities between her and Kamala in terms of her gender equality stance and just serving for the underrepresented throughout her years. It was also great seeing, of course, Barack and Michelle. I had the opportunity to meet Reverend Al Sharpton, Martin Luther King Jr.'s son, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters. I mean, the list goes on and on. From beginning to end, we got up at like 7 a.m. to check in, get credentials. And for me, on average, I didn't get back to my hotel room until like midnight every night. Um, and we just fed off each other's excitement, the raw emotion of the camaraderie of, no matter what your background was, the common belief that the DFL is going to win this year and it's going to be led by Kamala Harris and our governor, Tim Walz. And when Tim Walz came on the stage, I mean, we were already excited, but that energy re-amplified itself when Tim Walz came on the scene, and his son, of course, I'm sure many of you saw his emotional um, stance of seeing his father leading the country into victory. I mean, every day was just filled with adventure and just camaraderie, and it was just amazing to serve on that capacity, and definitely encouraged me to become more involved. Recently, I became the treasurer for Progressive Caucus. So I'm just excited to continue to engage and continue to try to promote people of different backgrounds and diversities to run for office or just to get involved. I met so many people who don't want to vote. And it's an interesting conversation when I meet people who don't want to vote because they feel like the change won't matter. And I always reemphasize the change won't uh, occur when you don't vote, and that how essential historically it is to vote. And again, just you got to vote. No matter which way you go, just get it in. Takes a few minutes to vote. But I am a proud supporter of Kamala Harris and Timothy Walz, and it's just been an honor and a privilege. And getting to know Lynn more, uh, checking in every day at 7 a.m. and seeing her beautiful face every morning, talking with her and her sister. Um, it just built more, I think, inclusivity within our district as well. So I just want to thank everyone for their support. Many of you donated to me, and I just appreciate everyone for their support.
Thank you, Cindy. And Len, before you respond, we have Dan Thomas Cummings now, who has joined us, and we know that he also attended the convention. So, Dan, after Len responds, maybe you can fill us in, introduce yourself. How was it for you to be a delegate? I believe you came in as a guest, And so would love to hear your perspective of the convention, being a guest. What are the key takeaways that you learned, or what that kind of enhance your understanding of the process of the DFL convention? And so, Lynn, I'll turn over to you, and then Dan, if you can chime in after Lynn.
Okay, thank you. Some things I totally agree with what Cindy has just said, that it was just an awesome experience and the people that you met. Couple of things, Barb and I arrived on Saturday, and everybody that we ran into, from the volunteers at the airport and the train station to random people on the train, were so friendly and helpful and happy. And that was just a great experience that we had, no matter where we were. We just, everybody was happy. Every morning, yeah, you're supposed to be at breakfast by 7:30, 7 if you can make it. And we had awesome speakers, and I tried to capture for everybody the speakers and post them on my Facebook pages every day. But sometimes I forgot because I was just listening to the speakers so much, and then I go, oh, I forgot to take that person's picture. The first night, there was, you probably have heard that there was a lot of difficulty with the buses. I mean, it was the first time the buses were running to the arena full of people. I caught the second bus from my hotel, and the first bus made it through mostly okay. The second bus was stuck behind the protests. And, so I'm sitting on this bus for a couple hours. I'm chatting to the woman from Missouri who's next to me, and she's showing me the agenda. And I didn't get that agenda. Well, I found it later, but she then would send it to me every day, the whole agenda for the convention. So I knew who was coming up next and who was on there. While I was sitting on the bus, all of a sudden Representative Freiberg texted me to say, get off the bus and walk. He had already gotten off the bus maybe 10 minutes before, and he was now inside the security perimeter. So I got Vita Canitz, who was a couple rows behind me. I said, we're going off the bus. And she was kind of like, I don't know if I want. We went off the bus. We walked 3 blocks. Meanwhile, the bus is still back where it was. We walked 3 blocks, and then we got in line in the security. So by the time we got to the security line, it was longer, and it took us quite a while then to get inside the security. But I took a picture. I held up my phone, and I took a picture of the line in front of me, and I turned it around, took a picture of the line behind me. And when I posted them on Facebook, my niece, who lives in California, goes, there's my friend Keely. Keely was 3 people behind me in line. And I was intending to try to meet up with Keely. I had no idea that she was behind me. At one point, she was almost next to me. And we finally caught up with each other on Friday, the day after the convention, before she flew out. So, there was that connection. On Wednesday, going to the convention on the bus is packed, including standing room only in the aisle, the little, the back door to the bus where there's 2 steps down to go out that back door. There was a guy standing there, and I'm sitting right behind him. And I'm like, I know this guy. I know this guy. I know this guy. But I couldn't put a face to it. So I finally got up my courage to ask him who he was. It was David Wellstone. So Senator Paul Wellstone's son. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know you. You were here, and you were at one of Representative Obermuller's fundraisers. You bought me a cup of coffee. And so it was those connections that we made that, was cool. It was wonderful. Each day was different at the convention. So I'll leave it there for now and give Dan some time.
Thank you, Lynn.
So, yeah, for those who don't know me, my name is Dan Thomas Cummins. I attended the National Convention as a member of the Rules Committee from the state of Minnesota, one of the 3 members that Minnesota elects. I was elected out of the uncommitted delegation. So when each of the state delegations met, at the time, Biden delegation and the uncommitted delegation at the end of the state convention, the uncommitted delegation had been allocated 2 of the 9 standing committee spots that Minnesota elected between rules, platform, and credentials. So We got one on rules, one on credentials, and I walked over to the delegation chair at that meeting, just happened to be there. I'm like, do you have somebody for this? And he was like, I didn't know we were getting somebody for this. And I'm like, okay, if you need someone, just, you know, I'd be willing to do it. I had no idea what it meant and no idea what the commitment would be. But frankly, I going to a national convention was not something that was like an idea that I would have had, especially in, you know, the scenario we were in March, that I wasn't super excited about Biden, frankly. Yeah, I think a lot of people also felt that way too, but I wasn't particularly psyched about going to a convention and going to all the trouble of getting elected and all the expense of flying there and staying there just to be just to cheer for Joe Biden. So I mean, for years when I was looking at that as like a thing that people were saying I should do, I thought that the rules committee or something like that would be the only way that I would like want to participate in a national convention. And this opportunity came up, and so I sort of threw my hat in the ring and asked, do you have someone for this? And they asked me some really tough questions. They told me afterward, at the we had like a dinner at the end of the convention, and just kind of debriefed there. And Asma, one of our other co-chairs for the Minnesota uncommitted delegation, was like, honestly, Dan, we thought you were a cop, so we didn't know what to expect with you, and we wanted to ask you a lot of questions because we really didn't know who you were. But Sam spoke on your behalf and was like, trust this guy. He knows what he's doing, and he'll fight for us. And they gave me a chance. So I got to go there as a member of the rules committee. I didn't get on the floor. I was given an opportunity to do that on the last day, but I was much more involved in what were the protests that were being organized by Uncommitted on a national level, including a sit-in outside the United Center calling for a speaker from Palestinian descent to address the convention. That was a lot of where my involvement was, and then also speaking to media about what Uncommitted was and what we were fighting for, which is a particularly impactful experience. Again, just talk to regular people like that in the hallway, and tell people what we were about, and have just a genuine conversation with people who didn't have a message or didn't have a stake in whatever was what we were discussing. But I also got to advocate for Uncommitted in an interesting way, trying to get on the floor. And I had 4 high-level staff members come up to me after they had gotten on the floor on the last night and said, thank you so much for working with us and making this work together. So I appreciated their work in getting us onto the floor and getting that group onto the floor. But it was just very, very different for me. So, nutshell.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Cindy and Len and Dan for sharing your perspectives of the convention. And then I see we have a hand up, Ron.
Hey, Dan, I am, well, first off, I think it's your haircut that led people to believe you were a cop. But that aside, do you think you got your message across from your Uncommitted perspective? Were you heard?
So by whom is an important question. I think that when it came to, so our goal was always to stop the bloodshed in Gaza via an arms embargo, but we were willing to work with, and support whatever we could do there. But we just didn't see any movement from the campaign. We saw some initial things going on a few weeks before the convention when 2 of our leaders met with Kamala Harris in Michigan, and she said they should set up a meeting. Well, that got out, and then they spit out a press release the next day saying, we'll never support an arms embargo, we'll never support a reduction in arms, and so on and so forth. So that was a struggle for sure. When it comes to were folks paying attention, I think yes. We still have stories as recently as this week from our local WCCO interviewing Minnesota uncommitted delegation members and leaders and asking them, what are you doing now that the convention's over? And a lot of it, the argument that we were trying to make to DNC and to the vice president was, help us help you. Palestinians can constitute a critical constituency within the state of Michigan, and there does not seem to be any path to victory without Michigan. So, help us be able to sell your case to these folks, our neighbors in this critical state. Help us show them that you care for them and that you want their support, that you need their support. That was kind of the angle that we were taking with it. It wasn't just to disrupt and say we're going to withhold support and all that. It's like, no, we're committed Democrats. We're all here because we're committed Democrats. So I think that there were a lot of folks. We heard some leaders tell us, the messaging and the media strategy has been outstanding from you guys. The campaign is actually scared of you right now. So, good job in raising this issue. And we got a lot of good messages of support from folks on the floor. And I think that we probably wouldn't. I will say this was the first time in Vice President Harris's speech that the word Palestinian was even mentioned on the convention stage in history. So I think that we are making it known there's a large constituency. The majority of Democrats want an immediate ceasefire. The vast majority of Democrats want an immediate ceasefire. Mm-hmm. I think this is a constituency that cannot be ignored if anyone's going to win in November, if we're going to win in November. And I think that message was communicated clearly, even if we didn't get the things that we were asking for specifically.
Thanks, Dan. When I was talking to some of the people that I know besides Lynn and Cindy and you who attended the convention, they said that it wasn't just like speeches. You had a chance to answer your point about the issues that the world is facing, Palestine and low income and people homeless, that there was different tours around Chicago for the convention folks, delegates to go and see the schools that was closing, some of the poverty. Can any of you speak to that? Was that true? That there were tours around the city, around different issues that were affecting the community? How did community play a role into the convention?
Mm-hmm. From my viewpoint, T, when we were on the buses, seeing the communities that were gated in, truthfully, in Chicago, the gates were all around basically the projects. And there was one way in, one way out. That was truthfully kind of disturbing for me. And they weren't temporary gates. They were permanent, high, strong gates. So that was truthfully off-putting for me. But I do think that some of the topics in the DNC and around the DNC were very impactful for those communities who are disenfranchised regarding criminal justice reform, healthcare access, voting rights, immigration. I think we set a firm stance on that reflected the priorities and concerns of these individuals, and also regarding the historical value of the legacy of civil rights, the importance of voting advocacy, the importance of civic engagement, and the importance of mobilizing, policy change, building coalitions. I think the topics spoke to reflect the changes needed within the communities. I think one of the main topics was trade. I think Governor Walz and Kamala Harris and others talked about the importance of bringing back the trades that and looking into the idea of not necessarily needing a college degree to have economic security. Of course, Miss Kamala Harris has, her plan for $6,000 towards housing, families starting out. The list goes on and on. And those were all communicated. And I think that can impact all of our communities in a positive light. So I think it was well communicated that we remain and recognizing the economic and racial disparities that do occur. That was a theme for me throughout the days, and how our importance of representation matters. And I also got the message that um, if you want to if you want to see this change, you got to be a part of the change. So Michelle Obama said, for us, her call to action was for us to do something. I think that spoke again to the fact that, quite frankly, people can point out the negatives in our communities, but it takes action to create those changes that you want to see. So becoming involved, I think, is imperative at this time. So it was just definitely moving, and I'm excited for what's going to happen next. I think Kamala's plan is jam-packed with initiatives that can help us move forward.
Thank you. Lynn or Dan?
I didn't take any specific tours, if that's what you're trying to get at, T. But I do know Bianca came down for 2 days and she got on a school sustainability, something like that tour. Technically it was full, but she used her way of, I'm a representative and I'm on the school board. So she and her daughter Autumn came down and they had 2 fabulous days. That this one tour that they took, every day you could sign up for a bazillion different things. And I did sign up for a number of things before I got to Chicago. But then when I was there, honestly, I did not get to the vast majority of what I signed up for because I just found transportation difficult. I couldn't debate on what time I had to leave in order to get there and not be stuck in the bus or stuck in a cab for 2 hours because of the protest. So I honestly didn't get to a lot of what I signed up for. But Bianca did sign up for this school tour. And she said it was just awesome that she got in on it and they were so happy to have her. She also connected with the Senate district chair from South Carolina, who said, "Oh, come down and teach us what you know." So she got an invitation that if she ever wants to go down to South Carolina to do that. But there were so many various seminars, caucuses, meetings all over the city that if you wanted to go to and could manage your way through, yep, you could do that and you were busy all the time. Partly given the transportation constraints, I felt my main goal was to go to convention every single night and make sure I wasn't late. So I was late 2 nights, but that wasn't totally my fault because I was on the bus for way too long. Otherwise I was at convention every night and made sure that I could be there by that time. Oh,
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Anything for you, Dan?
I think Lynn said it well, just that there were caucus meetings and committee meetings like throughout the day and throughout, that was kind of the daytime activity that was taking place in McCormick Place, kind of by the lake shore. Those were the events that I was least aware of. I probably wasn't as in the loop as others, so I wasn't aware of any other tours that were happening like that. Those caucus meetings are the ones that I was prioritizing a little bit. With Uncommitted, we were during the day talking to media, and then also a new term that I didn't quite recognize before this is bird dogging, talking to elected officials and kind of grabbing them in the hallway and just saying here's what we're about and this is what we're talking about and what we're fighting for. Can we count on your support for what we're saying, things like that.
Yeah.
Or at least just get them to know who we were and familiarize them, not just be like, you're some scary organization. So
Yeah.
That's what our daytime activities were prior to the evening stuff that you saw on TV.
Well, I have a few more questions, but I'd like to open it up to everyone else. Does anyone have a question that you want to ask our guests, Lynn, Cindy, or Dan?
Mhm. I guess my question to everyone is, do they feel that we served them and represented them well? Is there something that they would like to see for the next convention that was not conveyed?
Anyone?
I just want to say I so appreciate Dan's coming. It's really hard to go to a lot of rah-rah things and see what you think is really important not mentioned. So I'm really glad Dan came to this.
Thank you, Mary.
I
Anyone
feel
else?
represented.
Team, my question or comment follows on the last two. And that is, what is it that you, the delegates and representatives, including you, Dan, bring home to us here in SD 52? The takeaways that you can communicate to us or convey to us that we can take to the doors or the phones or talking to our friends and neighbors. What's the practical stuff that you can give to us to help us win this election? And Lynn, Cindy,
Maybe
Dan.
maybe we can start with Dan this time because Lynn and Cindy's been taking turns. So maybe Dan, you can start us off.
I think that the convention, I will say, from what was televised as well as kind of what was talked about a lot in the halls, I think that there is some really solid messaging about ways to talk about things. I think Governor Walz is a great example of that, and ways to talk to people in a frankly normal way. For too long, I think what the election of President Trump in 2016 signaled was that a lot of folks felt like politicians and folks in political positions didn't speak their language, didn't speak to them in a way that they could understand or felt like reflected themselves or their values or the way that they talk to their neighbors. I think Governor Walz represents a significant shift change from particularly that way of doing politics and that way of political communication. So when you're talking to neighbors on the doors, I think it just behooves us all to just get to know them on a personal basis and try to understand what is important to them, and not try to necessarily have a tone of, well, we are the political class and we are the politically educated class who pay attention to MSNBC and what read the Atlantic. Like, I think that there's a different tone of voice that comes out in that. So I think that Walz does a great job of modeling that, and I thought that was on display a lot of times throughout the convention. There's a great sense of humor throughout the convention. I thought Obama's crowd size comment was, I think that level of irreverence is particularly necessary when it comes to political communication. I think that a little bit of joking and trying to relate to people and through their sense of humor is really, really powerful. And I'm glad to see us lean into that. I think that that's something that we can use on the doors.
Yeah, Cindy, I heard a comment that you made in the middle of some of the stuff you were saying. Be the change you want to see, or words very close to that. And so if you're there talking to somebody who said, "Oh, I don't want to vote," or "I don't know what I should vote for," you start talking about what's the change you want to see and how can you be that change. How do you do that? How do you message that? And is that something that do you think, Cindy, that we can actually use as we're talking to friends, neighbors, and people on the doors?
Well, yes, just to give you a little bit of a backstory. When I came back home, I I was thinking about the gaps that were missing within the DFL. If you look on the DFL, not to, I love the DFL, I'm up forever, but I saw the job openings are targeted to colleges, to apartments. Then I was like, okay, what's missing? What's missing is the homeless people, people with GEDs, people with trade school, trades. I grew up in that kind of environment, so I think that way. So one of the first things I did by myself is I registered a few voters at Sugar and Caring Hands and People Serving People, because their voice matters. But during those conversations, a lot of those individuals said to me that they don't want to vote. They don't want to vote because they're tired. Um, they're tired of the broken promises, and it's a real conversation. And I think that we need to remain bold. We need to remain open-minded and meet people where they are, and non-judgmental, non-biased. Um, and even if someone says, "Hey, I'm going to vote Republican," and I had that too when people were registering to vote, they said they're going to vote for Trump. I said, "Okay, that's your prerogative," and I get it. I get it. So just continuing to have those conversations. And I think the conversations at the McCormick, regarding the Black Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, LGBTQI, just met the needs of the community, that we want to hear from our community what they vision as success. How do they define the DFL? What are their hopes? What are their dreams? And how can we put that into action? And for me, it just starts as simple as a conversation. I think some people just want to be seen. Some people just want to be heard. And those conversations can create an ongoing change of allyship and mentorship and just humanity at the core. So I think that is what I took away from it. And that is my call of action, is meeting people where they are.
Thank you, Cindy. Lynn?
Well, I'm not a great one on messaging, so, but my thinking is that walls, as we all know, is real, and like the person next door. I mean, like they're touting, okay, Walls is the one you want to go and have a beer with. So to me, it's bringing back that Kamala and Walls are genuine, and that they are there and they are listening. Maybe not they're listening to every little thing, but they are listening. And that's, I think, a big thing for our leaders versus somebody else who has, his ideas and thinks that eating dogs and cats is what's happening. So, I think that's a disparity that I would want to put out, is that we've got real leaders on the DFL.
Can I jump in just to tell Lynn that it's not that she knows quite a bit more about messaging than she's telling us, that everything that I know about communication in terms of voter contact, I learned from campaigns that she runs. So, you know what, there you go.
She's so humble. And I'm like, she doesn't know about messaging. I've learned a lot from you, Lynn. Come on. When I was watching the convention, there was so much excitement, so much like people just loving each other, right? You can just be in the right, you know how they always say know your audience, and it was just a room full of love and everyone shared the same things, same commonalities. Were there a moment where you were just disappointed?
I'll take that. No.
Can I say something?
Yep.
I think first and foremost, when I think about the logistics of creating this DNC event, 40,000 delegates technically in Chicago, they did a great job. And then they had to change the format from Biden Harris to Harris Walls. So that took a lot of work. But when I was there, I noticed a lot of ADA barriers. I myself experienced some feet pain, and I can't walk for like a long period of time. And I also was with some people who were requesting wheelchairs and things like that. And you had to go through this long line, go through security, and then walk or somehow get a ride to the the facility just to get your wheelchair. So that for me was the only thing that needed to be improvement was the ADA assistance and the assumption that people can withstand those barriers.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would have to say that, okay, there was, I think the number is 5,000 delegates.
Oh, sorry.
And that's okay. But then we were crowded into this arena that held, I don't know how many tens of thousands, maybe 20,000, 30,000, I don't
It
know.
was standing room only all the way to on the very upper deck.
Yeah.
The entire seating area was full. There's like a standing area at the very, very top where you're literally hitting the ceiling, and that was standing room only about 5 or 6 people deep from the rail. Like that's how crowded it was in there.
So
Right.
maybe that's where I got that number from, was the people who got
Oh.
in, because yeah, so sorry about
Everyone's
that.
got a different badge.
Okay. And I mean, Dan had more seating, physical seating area up in the nosebleed than we did on the floor. On the floor,
Mhm.
we were sitting in folding chairs that were wired together, and they were wired one leg to the next. There was no room between each chair. So sometimes, you know,
That's the COVID breakout.
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I was happy to not be on the
COVID
floor.
felt.
I didn't get it. So
And I think our row had like 8 to 10 people in it. And unfortunately, I tended to always get a seat, an assigned seat in the middle of the row. So, you know, if you had to get up and go someplace, you had to make all these other people move. And those last couple of nights, the aisles on both sides were jam-packed with reporters and other people who got, I don't know how, this was kind of irritating. They got a floor pass. They couldn't, you know, do any voting or anything if we had to vote, but they got a floor pass and they had to stand in the aisles.
mhm.
And that was awkward because you couldn't move. Yes, we got up and down for all the cheering and stuff,
Yeah.
but that was difficult. And you had to be careful with your chair. We were on folding chairs. And sometimes when you got up, the seat folded up. And you had to make sure that it was down before you sat down. Several people, you know, kept falling down because the seat was folded up. So being on the floor was okay. As you know, we were not, when this whole thing was planned, we were not going to be on the floor. So we all have these wonderful seat covers with our names on them. These were designed for the chairs up where Dan was, you know, up in the stadium seating. These were too big for the folding chairs. So every time we got up and down, they would fall off.
Wow.
But just another little thing in our swag bag, we have a Madam President t-shirt. The last night, Thursday night, we were supposed to wear our Vikings helmet that was made by somebody. And then all of a sudden news came, don't wear your Vikings helmets. And we don't know why. Nobody ever said why they didn't want them. We have a lovely swag bag. This was from the DNC. It's a nice canvas bag. It's too big to bring into the convention. You could not bring this bag in, even though the DNC brought it, and there's, you know, a lot of nice little stuff in there. We have another bag. It's not quite as stiff. That was from the DFL with, you know, there's aspirin in there and Tums and COVID test packs and stuff. That was just within the guidelines. So you could bring that bag in if you wanted to.
Leave it to Minnesota to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. Ron?
Let's talk about the media. And I don't mean the media crowding the aisles, Lynn. I mean the media here at home. You know, the media has been a problem with this election. The bias from the New York Times and Washington Post has been difficult to deal with, certainly difficult to watch and read. What can we do with our local media? And that starts with the Sun This Week newspaper and whether letters to the editor are effective, or whether we should try to write articles. Should we try to write op-eds for the Star Tribune? Should we be in touch with some of our TV people and our radio people? What about the aggregators like Blois Olson and Morning Take? And in this context, let me relate a short story. I had a set to yesterday with Tom Hauser, where he posted that Harris is slightly holds a slim lead, I think is the way he phrased it on his Twitter feed. And I wrote back and said, wait a minute, she's got a 5-point lead and the margin of error is three points. That's outside the margin of error, right? And he said, no, it's not actually. And he turns out to be right, that a 3-point margin of error means that Harris could swing three points and Trump's could swing 3 points. So if you do the swings as broad as you can, Harris could be up by 11 points. Trump would be up at most by 1 point. So I wrote back, and you may have seen my Facebook post ultimately, why can't you write a headline that says Harris has a potential for landslide in Minnesota? They're not doing anything like that. Out of what I just said, they would say Trump has a slim lead within the margin of error. How can we correct that? What should we be doing with the media to correct crap like that? Sorry, my diatribe.
Ron, you should buy a media station, a television station.
I have a Facebook page and a Twitter page, and I posted exactly what I just said. Recent polls in Minnesota show potential for Harris landslide. Did I get much following on that? No. What should we do?
The Reformer might be a good outlet for that. I mean, I'm not sure if you're connected to J. Patrick Kulikin, but he runs that, and at least that was much more left or progressive leaning. Is willing to amplify more local progressive voices. He offered me the opportunity to write an op-ed at the end of the 2023 legislative session on legislative procedure. I never got anything together for that, but I mean, he's, I'm sure, looking for folks to chime in their like community voices, opinion section. So, I mean, there's
I don't know him. Would you send an email to him, copy me, and make an introduction? I'd be happy to write something.
Sure, I think I have his email.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks,
So-
Ron, for that question. I mean, I agree. We need to get the media, I would say, more involved on both sides of the aisle, right? On both sides. As I want to be respectful of time, and I know we only have 10 minutes. So I want to ask everyone, do you have a question? Because I have a closing question I'd like to ask our guests. Anyone have a question?
I don't have a question, but if I could try to just quickly answer Ron's question, and my viewpoint is maybe reaching out to the director of these outlets to ask what are they willing to be more inclusive? And can we have the opportunity to present our case? Sometimes it takes just a ask. I don't know. But then at the same time, sometimes you can only control what you can control.
So as I was saying in the beginning, that there's been so much momentum since the Kamala Biden Kamala ticket was switched down to Walz, and then we had the debate recently. And so when you think about the convention and how you left the convention and the debate, and that momentum that the DFL party, all of us now have this excitement about really want to get involved. I'm going to be door knocking right after this and just get involved and really trying to get the community more involved. But we still have polls and statistics still show that 18, 24-year-olds are undecided or not going to vote. And I have a son that falls in that category, and a son that is, a little bit older, but not 30 yet, and still is in that category. And when I'm out talking to some of the colleges and some of the younger people, there are still not really supporting the DFL ticket or Trump ticket. They just feel like both of them are bad. So when you think about the momentum that you left the convention and debate, what's the message? What's the message for our young people, for the undecideds?
For me, I believe that margin might be wider than those statistics demonstrate. And that's just based on conversations I've had with people in our community. I don't know how they get the polls. I don't know who they poll, but I think sometimes our disenfranchised communities get left out. And for me, as I stated, I go to the places where sometimes the forgotten are and the unseen, and have conversations with these individuals to make sure that no matter their viewpoint, to please vote. Of course, if the conversation allows, have the ability to explain to them why I represent the DFL and how I personally feel that the DFL represents the needs of the community. And again, in terms of civil rights, representation, economics, the inclusive, being all inclusive, trying to reiterate those points. And if they need help in terms of where to vote, what items they need, because there's a lot of questions right now in terms of people who are formerly incarcerated, people who are homeless, all those barriers that do exist for many of our community members, just to continue to have those conversations.
And I'll say, and yeah, this is okay, fine if I do messaging, but I don't do good messaging. You have to craft the message for who you're at the talking with. So looking at one of the points that Jim would make that my niece Lindsay has made, politics affects every phase of your life. It affects, do you have housing? Do you have clean water? Do you have air? Do you have a job? And do you have Social Security benefits? All of the various things that it affects your life. So trying to explain that to somebody in a brief moment is very difficult, but you have to hit on what is it that they need. And then I'm going to say, going back to what I learned at Camp Wellstone decades ago, make it a positive of saying, we believe Kamala is going to win this state by a landslide, and we want you to be a part of this. We want you to be a part of getting us not just over the top, but way over the top, and come out and help us vote for the DFL because they're caring about you. Yes, and then as Jim has put in the chat, look at what the trifecta has done. People who have been incarcerated, now that they have completed their term, their sentencing, they can vote again. And that's something due to the trifecta. So we have to look at those points of what has happened, what has changed.
I would love to share a story straight from the doors 2 weeks ago, too. So I encountered a gentleman who is probably in his late 30s when I was door knocking for Bianca, which we do every weekend, and you can join us too. But he said, I mean, I haven't really ordinarily voted. I don't really know if I'm interested in voting, but I also think maybe I should be. And I said, okay, well, quite honestly, what are the things in the world that matter to you or that you notice and care about? And he was talking about how he was a nurse moving from Illinois and just waiting to get licensed here in Minnesota, and that he's in the meantime, while he waits for his licensure to get complete, he's working at like a fitness at a front desk at a fitness gym. And he's like, it's really hard work. I work really, really hard, and probably people think that's a throwaway job that shouldn't make a lot of money, but I can't live on this, and it's really hard work. And what do we do about that? And I said, I hear you. And so then I turned that around into why I believe in the democratic policy solutions that would help people at all levels of working have a livable wage. And that was what was important to me. And I was like, why do you think that is? I mean, if your philosophy is that they're just not working hard enough, or if your philosophy is that the taxes are keeping the gym owner down so then he can't pay enough to them, then you might be conservative. If you believe that the people at the top are keeping all the money and we should try to make sure everybody gets a livable wage when they trade their work, then you might be a Democrat. So I just led with questions and really authentically helping him investigate how he felt. And I left him with the knowledge that he might be a Democrat.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Lori. Dan?
Just real quick with I saw a news piece on the 12th on Thursday that came out from the Secretary of State's office that showed that since the law change to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote, 25,572 16 and 17-year-olds have pre-registered to vote. So I think that the more that we can talk about that with even younger folks who are younger than the 18 to 24 demographic, and help them build those habits and answer a lot of questions. I thought the work that Cindy was talking about, to speaking with folks who are housing insecure and don't have a consistent address, and talking to them about how can you get registered to vote and understanding what's important to them, and to what Laura's point was to say, you know, to key into what that critical need is that they're highlighting and saying for themselves, this is what I care about. And we're saying, well, here's how voting is supposed to help you for that, and how you can get more what you want by supporting a Democratic ticket. And I think particularly when folks who are housing insecure and young folks who may be in a transitional stage of life, you know, just answering questions about, you know, it says this registration form asks for my address. What do I even put here? Just being able to answer those questions when you're not the city clerk who can answer that question. I remember Christina Scipione's answer to that question very well, like it's where you lay your head most nights. That's where you register to vote, even if it's like an address of, you know, a building that you may be rough sleeping outside of. That's valid. You can do that. You can register that way. And you can register with a voucher there to vouch for your address if you're doing same day. Things like that we can just tell the story about the different ways that people can participate in this democracy and the different avenues that we offer in Minnesota to do that. We make it very, very difficult to turn people away from the polls in Minnesota.
Hey Dan, I want to be sure about something. I know that on election day itself, you can show up at your polling place and register to vote. If you are voting in person early, you go to the Eagan City Hall, for example, and you're not registered, can you register on that spot and then also do your either absentee ballot or your early ballot?
I'm not sure about that one, actually. Just a new thing that we're doing.
Anybody know?
Well, for me, when I moved to Eagan and I wanted to vote, for some reason I wasn't registered, but they let me vote that day. I don't think they can legally deny your right to vote at any given time.
Yeah, I would say I don't know that. I've been an election judge for quite a while, and I want to say yes, but I can't say that confidently. That if there two can show up at the Eagan City Hall, register to vote, and then sign up for your absentee ballot. I think if it's within the window, it makes sense, but I can't answer that.
You can. It's the same. I was just reading the Secretary of State site. I have it pulled up here. You can register when you vote. Minnesota voters can register at polling places on election day or early voting locations before election day.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, we are at 10 o'clock, 10:02. Thank you everyone for your time. I want to just have some closing remarks, just 1 minute to each of our guests, and then we'll end this, and then I think I'll turn it over to our vice chair, Curtis, if there's any comments that you want to make in closing. Lynn, do you have none?
Oh, okay, you want me to go first? I just want to say that this was a really fun and a once in a lifetime experience. I'd encourage everybody to do this once. Would I do it again? Absolutely. But I think everybody needs their fair shot at it. It was awesome, and I appreciate those of you, again, who voted for me at CD2 and allowed me to do this. I appreciate it very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. Lynn, Cindy or Dan?
Dan, you want, okay. Well, I just want to say that the experience was an amazing experience. It was truly an honor, a privilege, and a life-changing event. And for any community member, no matter the barriers that you're facing, if you believe in something, to continue to fight for what you believe.
I'll say I think the word life changing is also what came to mind at a lot of points throughout that convention. Just say like, oh wow, this just happened, or that person is here. I just spoke to that person. I just said that out loud on and talked to a reporter for the first time. Somebody asked a reporter for a national publication asked me what I thought about whatever thing. It's like, okay, now where does my life actually go from here? It's kind of jarring to think about that, and you can almost feel the focus of attention being so centrally on this one place. And I remember being out there with a press conference with our uncommitted group and having a bay of like 50 cameras and microphones sitting in front of us. You can almost feel the world turning around you. It's a remarkable feeling. As far as getting there, I know that, like I said, I wasn't planning on doing anything like that until June rolled around. And it was like, oh, I'm going to Chicago. Okay, how do I do that? And so I want to give a special thank you to Lynn and folks who were able to provide support to me to get to Chicago. That was not a small expense at all. The more that we can do to make that less of a barrier for folks to participate will be important. But I really appreciate everybody who contributed to my ability to participate in there. It's only because of you that I was able to go and be part of that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And thank you all. Thanks for representing our district. I got to see something when I watched the recording. I was like, oh, they made national recording. I see Lynn's face. I see Cindy. Dan, I'm sorry I didn't get to see you, but I knew you was there. I felt you in spirit. So thank you all for your time. Curtis, I think we turn off recording now and then you give your announcements.
That sounds like a good idea.